Hello and welcome to Movies, Films, and Flicks. I am Mark Hoffmeyer, and joining me is a man who hates it when a transporter malfunctions. It's Niall Moore.
How you doing, Mark?
Niall, what did you do to me here? Because all right, so I just we're covering Star Trek: The Motion Picture. I haven't really watched many Star Trek movies, and maybe a couple episodes of Next Generation. So when you suggested Star Trek: The Motion Picture, I was like, that'd be great. But since I do so much researching, you said I'm what overprepared, Ken. It I I've discovered a world, a literal world, Niall, of Star Trek information. I'm excited to talk about it with you. We'll keep it for just Star Trek the motion picture. We're going to talk about other Star Trek films in the future. But geez Louise, I love it. This makes me happy. I'm excited to talk about this movie because there's a lot to talk about.
Well, there's a lot to talk about, but you have to also be very careful what you say. The fan community of Star Trek can be quite particular about what they think is correct or what they don't.
So, I worked Comic Cons between 2010 and to like late 2016. So I did about 50 Comic Cons with Wizard World. And I got to witness every type of fandom and how they behaved waiting in line or when they get frustrated or when they're heading into a panel. And Star Trek fans are definitely some of the chillest because I feel like that show's all about just figuring something out. There's a giant robot coming to Earth. Let's figure it out. Like, let's not blow it up. Let's not set phasers to stun. Let's just go inside of it, get swallowed whole, mind meld, chat with it, get one of our assistants to become our android, and then take the former captain and then have them bond into the computer and take off. But they were all chill. So even though I never watched Star Trek, I appreciated the fan base because Star Wars fans are maniacs. Walking Dead fans are maniacs. Man, don't even get me started on like the DC Marvel people. But I've always liked Star Trek fans, Niall. They're particular, but I like that about them. So that's probably my favorite fan base. Aside from Doctor Who, they're nice. Well, no, wait. Pre like a female becoming Doctor Who. That's
Yeah, that
probably
kind of
yeah.
upset quite a few of them.
Yeah. Before status quo was messed up. But yeah, this is cool. And now I kind of know. I wish I would have known a lot of this when I was dealing with Star Trek fans back in the day, but this movie's fun, man. There's gonna be a lot of cool stuff to talk about for sure.
Yeah, this film, it's probably the weakest of the films made with the original TV show cast, I think. It or potentially number five whenever we get to that, but we'll talk about that down the road sometime. If these episodes are doing well, I guess we might not
I
get
don't
that
care, man.
far.
This is fun and it's easy for me because we can just build on top of them. It makes my life easier.
Yeah, for sure. So this one, it's a very, it was a huge risk at the time.
Mhm.
Um,
Very expensive.
they were essentially rebooting a TV show that had been cancelled after four seasons and bringing it to the big screen. And they put a lot of budget behind it. They'd obviously seen what you could do with the likes of 2001, which showed, oh, you can have quite high res spaceships that look really, really cool in a cinema versus the tiny little models they had in the Star Trek TV show. Then you had Star Wars, which showed there was a huge appetite for space opera and that there was money in it. And then you had this property that Paramount had, which was Star Trek, where a lot of the cast were kind of keen to say, "Oh yeah, I will do that again if it's right." So they were trying to reboot it for several years, and then they came up with this Star Trek, the worst tagline ever: Star Trek, the motion picture.
Oh man. But it's smart, right? You're like Star Wars is hit. TV show like all these TV shows, like people are just putting like failed TV pilots in theaters and they're making $30 million worldwide. We need to catch this fast, right? Like, we need to put something in quick. And then yeah, we got Star Trek, Paramount. Let's just make that movie. And let's hire Robert Wise, who I don't know, I guess that makes sense, right? Because he did The Day the Earth Stood Still. I mean, I know he has Sound of Music and West Side Story, but you bring in a prestige director to direct a script that's only two-thirds done because you have dates to hit. So now I was watching a documentary and I sent you this message, but I love what this documentary had to say. So they were like, they had two-thirds of a script. People were hired like 10 days prior to shooting. Let's see, they had to like each actor changed their role. So they had to rewrite what each actor liked every single day. Someone wrote, there are so many changes every day. Every actor had to be happy. And then they put, there was a time limit. Then they put, let's see, under the circumstances, this movie is good. They said the production schedule was tightened. Let's see. Then we had the director talking about maybe having a nervous breakdown. They had to revise the score. Nothing is working right. There is no theme. Last minute, 3,000 little gravestones, Herculean effort to produce a movie that people call the motionless picture. But the one thing I like most about this movie is it takes its time. I know a lot of people hate it for that, Niall, but the beginning opening credits feel like they last about 43 minutes. When the ship is going into docking station and taking off, that takes at least 3 hours. And then when the ship drives into V'ger, that's another 37 minutes. I'm exaggerating here. And they're all beautiful and they're all relaxed to look at. But the reason I think this movie, people call it the motionless pictures, they didn't have a script. They didn't know if Nimoy was coming back. So it's like, they're like, okay, what can we actually shoot? A ship going into station or a ship going into another station. So I think they just expanded everything because they didn't know what they were going to have. Because they literally didn't have the final finale of the script.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think that is possibly what dragged out some of those sequences substantially. They needed to fill time, and at least the
oh,
at least the shot of when they first see the Enterprise, for example, that is gratuitous fan service. This was the first time that, you know, fans of the original Star Trek show were getting to see the Enterprise on the big screen. So they put a lot of money into building this, and they put a lot of work into the VFX, etc., building this model. I get why they wanted to show it off. At the same time, they could have shortened that sequence by
2 hours,
a significant amount of time. I was rewatching it the other day, not as a Star Trek fan, you know, trying to rewatch it in preparation for this rather than I will put it on just because I like to watch Star Trek. And if I'm watching the movies, I start with the first one, even though it's not great. And I reckon there's a fairly tight film in there if you cut out a lot of the really long, drawn out sequences of dudes in spacesuits floating around for no apparent reason other than we have a green screen and we can have a guy floating in space, or really, really slow pans over these detailed models that they built, or psychedelic traveling through the center of V'ger. And I think this is something you messaged to me, I think, when you'd first watched it. This would make quite a tight 2-part episode. You could cut the end of the episode about where what was her name? Ilia gets vaporized.
Yeah.
And then everybody's looking, oh no, what's going on? And then the conclusion is this robot thing comes back. You know, Ilia, you know she's sexy because she has to tell you that she's taken a vow of celibacy. That's how you know she's down.
Out of nowhere, too. No one asks her. She just tells the people that. And I remember, you know, when you're sitting there watching a movie and a line happens that you just go, what? Like, what? Huh? And I kind of had to rewind it. Yeah, that's a very funny line, though. Just not funny, but it's so blunt that it made me smile. Is that very Star Trek-y or no?
The bluntness would be. I guess that is. I'm not really that familiar with the original series. I've watched a good few episodes, but not all of them, and I'm not really up to date. That might have been something from some of the episodes, that there was this species who were very, very horny, but I don't recall it.
You know what's crazy about this movie too is, you know, so actually I think you're right though. This movie would make for a good 2-part episode because it could be each episode's 40 minutes, hour and 20 minutes. But I guess we say that now, but these people went in with 2/3 of a script. They had to completely redo their special effects. The ship that they built was 9 feet long, and everyone wishes it was bigger. They had to develop a new periscope lens just to film it because it was so small for, I mean, it was big for a miniature, but it wasn't that big. And it's just like Robert Wise was just steering this ship that nobody really knew where it was going. And it just, and also too, this is an odd one because they introduced two major characters played by Stephen Collins, Decker, and Persis Kambata as Ilya. They're two brand new characters, and a lot of focus is on them. But then they just kind of suck them into a machine at the end, and they're like, "Okay, it's the OG cast again. Don't worry about these new people." And you can tell that everything changed because the two new leads are just killed. If that like, and they're not red shirts either. So you could see the script just going through so many different variations of change to reach this deadline. But nonetheless, it's still nice to look at. And I think I like the relaxed vibe because there's not many movies that are this relaxed, Niall. Even 2001
It's
stressful.
it's true. And I was arguing with someone on Reddit today, as you do, um, where they had said they would cut 30 minutes from the Batman and they would cut 30 minutes from Blade Runner 2049. And my argument was, I love how those movies let the plot breathe. And this is exactly what Star Trek the Motion Picture does. I think it lets it breathe a little bit too much.
It left the wine
It's
on the table. The wine breathed for a long time, right?
it's a little bit too much breathing room, but I don't necessarily mind the ponderous pace when it serves the story and when it really builds the atmosphere of the world, like in the Batman or in Blade Runner 2049. You got a real sense of the world that this thing was set in, and the slower pace kind of helped with that. Here, a lot of it was look at all the pretty things we have
To distract from the plot.
to distract from the paper thin plot, which is essentially there's a thing coming. We don't know what it is.
We're the only ship around.
We happen to be the only ship around. It's the most common trope in Star Trek. You will see this an awful lot, where the hero ship just happens to be the only ship in range to deal with anything and everything.
But I love it. It's funny that you say that because while watching Batman Begins and Blade Runner 2049, not once did I ever think, geez Louise, hurry up. Or that could have left. Like, that's not needed. That could have been excised. But while watching this, I just had a big smile on my face as everything was like the opening credits take about 4 minutes. And you can very clearly tell that they're trying to be very 2001, which is fine because 2001 looks amazing and they had an incredible VFX crew on this film. But you're right, it's just look at these pretty things. Like entering the ship, how long it takes. It's kind of crazy when you think of maybe a movie like Independence Day when they enter the spaceship. That's 2 minutes, but you get a lot of it and you feel it. You know how far in they are. So it's kind of weird when a movie like Independence Day has a ship entering scene that's done more efficiently than Star Trek, the
Well,
motion
that's the
picture.
thing. The ship in Independence Day is what, 20, 30 kilometers, even bigger, the mothership.
Yeah.
It was what, a quarter the size of the moon? Whereas the Enterprise is what, 300-400 meters?
That's true.
It shouldn't take that long to just. To be fair, it actually matches up more to real life space exploration where they do have these very slow moving things because they have to be careful, versus what you typically see in science fiction where you have magic thrusters that can just point you in the direction you want to go. And somehow, if your spaceship has wings, it can fly like an airplane in space, even though there's nothing for those wings to act on.
That's the world, though, right?
Yeah.
Because in this world, these things work like that and they look cool. But
At least in Star Trek, actually, they don't really have wings so much. They just have engines that can kind of push them around in various directions.
do the
Kind of makes
Klingons have
sense.
wings?
Not in this one.
Oh, okay. Got it. But yeah, I'm telling, like, this movie, it's 45 minutes before they leave the deck, and most of it is just Shatner arguing with Decker
I think
about
part
the
of it
ship.
is they needed to introduce these characters to the audience,
Oh, absolutely.
because if you come into this blind, having never, you don't know who Captain Kirk is, you don't know who
True.
Mr. Scott is, you don't know who any of these people are. And I guess they needed to almost have a scene with every original crew member who seemed to have to interact with Shatner for probably Shatner ego reasons, most likely. But you had each of these scenes where they would interact with the captain, and you get kind of a sense of, okay, this person is obviously someone who is important or whatever. Um, and that's kind of how it went. And then for some reason they had a Cronenberg-ish transporter accident
Oh my
thing where
god.
they brutally killed off the new Vulcan science officer.
Because Nimoy came back and then they had to kill him because that guy was cast in the role, which is kind of
It's one way
crazy.
of doing it.
Yeah. Like, that was such a long scene too. You're like, oh, what's left of them? Like they died quick, and it's a good thing. And it's that's I'm telling. Would you want to
And then
direct
they
this?
immediately beamed up Dr. McCoy straight afterwards, and everything was fine. It's like, oh yeah, we fixed that glitch. No worries. We just melted two people with this thing, but no, it's fine now.
Someone has a wrench and it's just banging on the thing, and they fixed it. Would you want to direct this movie? So by this time in his career, Robert Wise was established Oscar winner legend, but he had to make a movie with 2/3 of a script on a very tight production design, on a very tight production schedule, lots of visual effects. Every single actor needed their input. They hadn't had Leonard Nimoy back, and it was just a rush job. Would you? Because for me, directing this movie felt like less of a creative endeavor and more of a like balance, like juggling act to try to add like it felt like baking. You got to take all these ingredients and just make it somewhat work very quickly. So he had a lot of money at his disposal. Paramount threw a lot of money, but is this a project you would have wanted to tackle?
It comes down to what you see in the project. Sometimes a project can be interesting because it's got a great idea, or there's something really interesting about it, or you'll get to work with specific actors or whatever. I think this is the other thing. This was what looked like a huge challenge, which would have had quite a payoff if he succeeded in doing it.
Yeah.
And he probably got paid pretty well to do it. So the risk isn't really there. It's like, well, I will have a go at this insanity and we will see how it goes.
If anything, if it doesn't work, you can be like, listen, I went into it with 2/3 of a script. I had to completely rewrite the script every day of filming. The score wasn't good at first. We had to get a new score. And then we had to redo the visual effects. We had to add new crews in. And then we had Nimoy joining in. We had producers begging him at tables to come back so we could get paid from all of his residuals from the Star Trek movies. You could blame that, if that makes sense. So if your movie doesn't do great, you're like, guys, I delivered a movie. It looks good and it makes sense and it has a story. So at the
I
very
do
least,
find the
there's that
scoring
argument.
weird. The score is weird.
It is, right? But there's no time. There's no time. I'm sounding like Liam Neeson.
There's kind of a disconnect with what's happening on screen and what's playing. All of a sudden, it goes into the big bombastic main theme, which was later used for Star Trek: The Next Generation as this big fanfare esque kind of thing. And Kirk's just like walking around or something, and it's like do 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 do. It's like what is going on here? This just makes no sense. And then at other times, I think it's a precursor to Hans Zimmer's synthesizer from the late 2000s, 2010s, the big boombastic. Whoa.
There's some big, like, what are the noises? Like, not like Dune noises, but there's some big boom that happens. So, I mean,
Oh yeah,
it may have influenced a lot of things and was important for Star Trek: The Next Generation. We'll get to that later because that's a different story about how they came up with that score. But yeah, no, you're right. There are some big. I'm trying to think of the movie that like maybe was it Independence Day with those big like boom. What is that from?
maybe.
But yeah, you heard those and you. That's why I kind of love this movie, man. It's just the lady becomes a robot, but then he has to win over the robot, and then
which was very bizarre.
you then you get stuck into a warp speed and you have to shoot missiles at something, and they're talking in slow motion, and
Which is something that never happened in Star Trek before or after. They just made up this random thing that happened to happen. Again, that's another thing that would be cut if you're trying to tighten up this movie, because there's the only reason they have that scene is to show that Deckard is competent and knows what he's talking about, and basically countermands Kirk and have a little bit of conflict there where he's like, look, I know what I'm doing. Stop being a dick.
and Shatner gets called out for it because he's deliberately saying no to everything this guy says. Like he rushes into this ship like a bull in a china shop. And also, they don't let the captain know that he's going to be demoted by Kirk. Like, Kirk shows up. Niall, you're the captain of a ship. You've retrofitted it. You've fixed it to your liking. You have worked on it. It's still not ready yet, but you know every nook and cranny of this ship. And then this guy comes in and be like, yeah, you're demoted. You're the science officer. Just then and there in front of your entire crew. You're going to be pretty pissed.
I would be straight on the communicator to Starfleet Command and ask them what the hell is going on.
Yeah, you wouldn't be on the transporter. You would avoid. You're not certain of the transporter yet, but
I would be calling them up and saying, "What the hell is happening? I thought this was my mission. What's he doing here?" And then they can explain to me that he's going to command it, and then you can say, "Okay, can he be an observer? I'll remain as captain of my ship, and he can just advise."
Yeah,
which again, it wouldn't have made sense. And then it was weird that I can't remember, was he supposed to be an admiral and then he demoted himself to captain just to be captain? Or there's a lot of weirdness with rank going on. When it gets to the later movies, everybody's a captain, but for now, there's just kind of a little bit of weirdness.
But I know we're all saying this, but like the outfits, like Kirk has the tightest shirts on. He's showing his guns. These outfits never appeared again. Like, they went back to their other ones in Wrath of Khan. So it's just a movie that I think was really rushed. I think they wanted to really make it less. I read an interesting quote by Gene Roddenberry, and he said that the walls that people used to make for the TV show, he called them Des Moines Holiday Inn style, because they were just plywood walls. Like, the sets were really cheap. So I think they really wanted to make something grand and fancy and classy and kind of funky and kind of retro and kind of disco. But that's not really what Star Trek is. I think Star Trek is at its best when it embraces that it's Star Trek. Not when you try to polish it up to be something else. And I think that's when Wrath of Khan really started to do that, correct? You had the holy trinity of characters jabbering back and forth. You had the kind of mystery of the week. You had some drama, other I think that's how Star Trek works. It's not something that you should class up, if that makes sense. You can't make it.
I don't know about classing up. The original Star Trek was very campy, very Galaxy Quest. You can see the inspiration for that awesome movie.
I mean, the lizard fight is insane in Star Trek. It's beautiful. It's so cheap. But like, I think that's what it was, right? It was super campy, and then they kind of tried to make it very adult and not wildly campy. But I think it's still, I guess what I'm saying is,
for this film, I think they abandoned the camp and tried to make it this serious piece of science fiction, and that doesn't work either. You need to have, if everyone takes it too seriously, it doesn't work. And if everyone's gone too far the other way, it doesn't work. There's kind of a fine line between the camp and the seriousness that later movies and some episodes of the show definitely found. Others not so much. They tip one way or the other.
I guess because they were spending so much money, they just wanted to avoid that camp, right? They wanted to make it a serious, like The Day the Earth Stood Still is a very serious sci-fi film. It's very time sensitive. So I think this one, directed by Robert Wise, I don't know if he would have wanted all that camp. He probably wanted to
potentially not.
Yeah, and just let's make this movie. I mean, listen, everyone was influenced by 2001, so we can't knock on it for that. And then everyone loves Star Wars. So I think those two things, they took those into consideration. And one nice thing about Star Wars is it's not heavy on, it's very funny and it's very cheeky, but it's not a super campy film. The first one, it has some muted colors. You have Vader, the tans, the blacks. It's not the brightest of movies. It's quite grungy, actually. So I think they took inspiration from that and cooked out this film. And so it's kind of interesting when you watch this, because you can see why it is what it is. And that, I think, you can say that it's wrong that they made it the way they did and had such a tight schedule and kind of lost the campiness. But it's still, I mean, at this time, superhero films, like, remember X-Men in the 2000s? They didn't put them in their X-Men outfits either. Like, they put them in black leather get-ups. So I think they were kind of scared. They
Which
were
we're finally getting rectified. I think in a few months we'll get to see Wolverine in yellow.
finally, but like, studios were too afraid of putting them in their colorful outfits. So I just think you can see how this movie is and what it is and how they learn from it. Most importantly, how they learn from it. So I was looking at the tomato meter scores for all of the Star Trek movies. And so, like, the way they're ranked is Star Trek 2009, then Star Trek First Contract, Star Trek Beyond, Star Trek Wrath of Khan 82 as an 87% score and a very high IMDb score. And it made a lot of money. And I think they learned from Star Trek the motion picture. And I don't know. I think that, does that make sense? Like, I think
I think so.
it was
I think
necessary.
some of what didn't go well in the production was the actors knowing the characters better than the writers
Yep.
and feeling they knew better. Because obviously they'd played these characters for 3-4 years and had a feel for what they as actors thought the character would do in a certain situation, or how they would speak, or what they would say. And I think when it came to the later films, they had writers in place who actually understood what they were going for and how they were going to maintain this kind of throughput of the characters themselves.
Absolutely. I mean, hey, let's like the franchise if we're gonna write it. Like, let's like the characters. Let's know what.
Well, yeah, look how that works these
Yeah,
days. You have the Witcher, where
oh
the
yeah.
writers apparently hate the books, but they're just writing the show.
It blows my mind. Like, I think that happens with some Marvel films and some Sony Marvel, not just MCU. I think that happens with some DCEU films as well, where, I mean, just, I think people want jobs, right? If someone's like, Mark, do you want to write Batman? Yeah, I'll write Batman. I don't know much about Batman, but I'll do a lot of research and I'll write one. But I think these movies, this is such an obvious statement, and I hate saying it, but I think these movies work best when people love the IP, when people love the franchise. Now, that movie Challengers just came out. I know Luca, the director, doesn't like tennis, but that movie doesn't live and fail on tennis. It lives in it succeeds on its character work. So, but I think when it comes to X-Men or Spider-Man, like Sam Raimi, you could tell loves Spider-Man in Spider-Man 1
Yeah.
and 2. And then 3 went off the, he wanted Sandman, but they forced Venom, and then it got blown up, and like, you could tell his heart wasn't in it. But you know what's interesting? He didn't like Venom. He didn't want Venom, and you could feel it in the movie. But you could feel his
Well, look
love
at
in the first two.
Peter Jackson as well. You know,
Oh my gosh.
The Lord of the Rings, an absolute passion project, and then The Hobbit, where he was kind of shoehorned in to direct this thing that Del Toro had started making, and it just didn't have the same amount of love and reverence and nuance to it that the Lord of the Rings had.
Have I shared my theory with you about the Hobbit trilogy?
No, I don't think so.
I think, okay, so Peter Jackson was like, okay, it's 2 movies. Then he's like, 3 movies. Each budget was 200 million. They all made close to $1 billion. So it was profitable for everyone involved. No one kind of left that franchise feeling like maybe fans did, but no one left feeling like they lost money. But I think he stretched out the 3 and made them so long to just fund the New Zealand film industry for an extra couple of years. Because by all accounts, the production was absurd. Everyone was in New Zealand for years. And I think that by adding a third film, by adding the budget, Weta got more work. The special effects crew got more work. The armors got more work. Props got more work. Catering got more work. Hotels got more work. So I think I don't know. That's my
I don't
cynical
hate
theory.
that. I think that could be accurate. Who knows?
Because there's no reason to make so he made 3 movies out of 3 books, and then he made 3 movies out of 1 book. That's not even that much of a book. It's a great book, a beautifully written book, but I'm just saying he added a lot. He added a love
Well, yeah,
triangle.
that book is. I think you can read that book in about 3 hours, whereas the it's shorter than one individual book of Lord of the Rings, I think.
Yeah, yeah, no, it is. It really is, and it's. Uh, I think he just wanted to fund the New Zealand film world, and he did. He probably put millions of dollars in the people who live in New Zealand's pockets by all the crew working in rentals and everything. So that's my theory about, and probably they probably built new sound stages for the film. So it kind of helped kick off the New Zealand film industry for another 10, 15 years. But this one, Star Trek the Motion Picture, you don't really feel any love for Star Trek. You don't, because you know why? I think the director was just trying to survive each day, not literally. I think he just had a tight schedule and had actors who knew better than him, and he just had to deliver something. And that something is this movie. So it's
So if you take this movie and remove all of the Star Trek characters and replace them with, say, generic stereotype characters, does it change the movie at all?
no,
I would say
because
not really.
right.
There's nothing Star Trek, at least there's nothing uniquely Star Trek about it. It's Star Trek adjacent. It's about exploration in space, etc. And
Not always
there is part of
blowing
that.
things up, right? Not always
Yeah.
blowing things. So they don't blow it up. They
No, they
see
don't.
what's going on.
They see what they can, how they can communicate with this thing, or how they can, rather than just trying to explode it at first try. But if you were to transplant generic sci-fi characters into this, you don't really lose any of the interactions between the characters because isn't really any character development between any of the main cast, except for the 2 new characters, Deckard and Elia.
And they get sent away.
That's where the growth is. They're the people who actually grow. The others could be anyone.
Yeah, and then they're no more. So the 2 characters that get any growth are sent into a computer to be ghosts in the machines. And they're like, don't they say, I think we created something, and they're just going to go off and kind of hang out in the
Yeah, if
galaxy.
you remove all of those characters, replace them with different ones, you can call it, I don't know, Voyager 1, a Star Trek story or something,
Oh,
and then have it as a separate thing. Take Kirk out, take Spock out, take all of them out. Doesn't even need to be the Enterprise. It can be some other ship, and then it doesn't change at all, really.
it doesn't. And I still don't dislike it, but I think as misguided as it is, I think they just need to make something. Like they were like, we got to make something. So let's just turn what phase 2, that
Yeah,
script, let's turn that into a movie and let's roll. Let's rock. And I was looking at this, and like the highest rated Star Trek is Star Trek 2009 by J.J. Abrams. I think he did a really good job of resetting the franchise. But if you look at like First Contact, that's the second highest rated one, and that was directed by Jonathan Frakes. And then you have Wrath of Khan by Nicholas Meyer. You have The Undiscovered Country, Nicholas Meyer, and you have Voyage Home by Leonard Nimoy, and Search for Spock, Leonard Nimoy as well. Well, and I'm going to add Insurrection, which is 55, which I actually really liked. But then these are all people who loved Star Trek, and their movies really
yeah.
succeeded. But I don't think they were on as tight of a schedule as the rest of the gang. And I
The
know
thing
some. I know
this
some.
did
What's up?
So what this did was it proved that this was a profitable concept because it made
Mm-hmm.
what 80 odd million at the box office. I'm not sure what the budget was, but it was sufficiently profitable that they would have been able to greenlight another movie. And somebody obviously made the good decision to get someone in that loves it.
You are 100%. Yeah, the budget was 35 million, and it made 139 worldwide, which is giant. Not giant, but it's big. And I think,
But
yeah, they're
in
like, okay,
1979, was it?
so if you look,
That was a decent.
yeah, when adjusted for inflation, that's 353 million, according to the numbers. So yeah, I mean, they pulled in some bank. And then they had most importantly, they had time to make the sequel. And then they go and they churn out Wrath of Khan. But you know what's interesting about these movies is they made good money, but the highest grossing Star Trek, when not adjusted, only made 400, only quote unquote, made 467 million worldwide. You know, the movies like Minions makes 1 billion. Star Wars makes 1.6, The Force Awakens. What do you think is about these films, these Star Trek films, that make them not as profitable as some of their other franchise brethren, like the Hunger Games or Twilight? Or is it just because of how, you know, they're not trying to blow things up? It's more sciency. It's more quote unquote. You know, real quick, I'm sorry to like Niall. Star Trek was dorky back in the day, right? Quote unquote, like in the 90s, 80s, 70s.
Oh, certainly.
If you if you were a Star Trek fan, and I hate to say this, times have changed. I think Star Trek 2009 made really changed the trajectory of Star Trek. But you know, I was in middle school in the 90s. And if like Star Trek was the nerdy, Star Wars was nerdy, comics were nerdy, all of that was nerdy. I would say it started to shift around what, 2000, when X-Men, Spider-Man, Harry Potter, Lord of the Rings came out. And then I
I
think
don't think it ever stopped being nerdy. It's just being nerdy became cool.
got it. Yeah, because nerdy
You
was
had the
not
rise of
cool.
geek culture versus what it is now. It's still a nerdy thing being into Star Trek versus say being into sports. But these days you've got the whole geek culture, the whole thing where being nerdy is actually almost more mainstream than being a jock or super into sports. Maybe not quite, but you get
Yeah.
where I'm going.
No, absolutely. And so I mean back then it was different. And I think Star Trek was still making movies when Star Wars had a very long hiatus. So I think with the Star Trek movies, people like them, but I just remember this feeling around them being like, oh, a Star Trek movie. And I would go see them, but they weren't, it wasn't I was probably too young for all of the original, like the OG cast ones, but I watched, you know, I think I went and watched First Contact, which is the one with, is that the one with when they all come back together? Like that's the kick.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. When they all when that comes back, like that's when I remember it making its comeback. But I think maybe, do you think that's the reason why they haven't been the most successful
I think part
films?
of it could be a lack of broad appeal.
Mm,
Sometimes there is potentially a stigma of being from a TV show versus being purely cinematic, where you might see something that's imagine you're going to a theater, Mark, and you have two options. It's you can watch Buffy the Vampire Slayer, the TV series, the movie, or some original, I don't know, Star Wars episode 10 or something. Yeah, it's not quite the best
no,
thing, but you've got something that is purely cinematic versus something that oh, I saw a few episodes of that on TV. That was a bit crap. It was almost maybe the audience was oversaturated and had their expectations colored, so they wouldn't necessarily go and see these things, even if they are good.
no, you're right. I would definitely go see the newest, what is it, Star Wars movie. And I mean, look at Serenity. That movie didn't make much money. Look at the Veronica Mars movie that was crowdfunding. It didn't light the world on fire. I think it was I think, yeah, I think there is a stigma. And remember when the Next Generation cast passed over into films? Like, oh, we are going to start putting the Next Generation cast into movies. So you have you kind of like, hey, why am these TV people are on my big screen? Because the 90s wasn't exactly known for crossovers between, you know, big name actors on, you know, TV and movies had a what's the word? They were different, right? You couldn't just poke
You
back and
had
forth.
Clooney maybe who made it from ER and then moved to kind of the big screen.
Like,
He's the only one I can think of that did it kind of successfully,
I think
who
SNL
was a
actors,
big TV star.
you know, like
Yeah,
SNL, but they were more comedians, right? You never had, I guess you're right. Clooney, when he crossed over, that was huge. Maybe Tom Selleck, or no, was he? I don't remember. Was he always the TV guy?
he might have been. He was in what, Three Men and a Baby,
Oh, which
and
was one of the hugest films.
And he did, but Magnum PI, I guess, was his bigger. Could have been
So,
indie, but not quite right.
but yeah, I think I I guess for me, Star Trek always felt very, for lack of a better term, we are going to figure this situation out with science, and we are going to have some camp involved, and we are going to
There will be
explore.
technobabble. There
Yes,
will be various human-shaped aliens with various prosthetics attached to them so that you know that they're aliens.
shields will be raised, and it's,
And
yeah. So I guess I just never. I mean, I love the one with the whales. I remember I saw that when I was young. And I was like, "This is
that's great.
incredible." Yeah, and
That's one of my favorites. That's what prompted this because I think I was watching the one with the whales, and you'd messaged me, and I was like, "Oh, I'm watching Star Trek 4 right now." It's a great guilty pleasure.
and then also too. I mean, I remember watching, what is it? I'm trying to find it. Oh, First Contact. I remember that one knocked me my socks off because it felt that one felt dangerous, right? That one feels like probably one of the most violent and dangerous of.
That one is great. Well, what you've got there, you've got Patrick Stewart killing it, doing his Captain Ahab routine, and the cast have obviously got their roles down. It's obviously well written. All the characters kind of know what they're doing, and you've got a scary antagonist. It works.
And it made money. That's the highest. So when unadjusted for inflation, it made the most money of all the non JJ Star Treks. But I remember I remember watching that and going, "Whoa, this one's pretty gnarly," and I liked it. So it's, I think there's a certain factor to be had that makes, like, I guess when they leaned into something a little scarier there, that I really kind of bonded with it. But it, I don't know. I guess for me, I don't know. What am I trying to get at here? The I guess I always just thought it was kind of a, I think also too, Galaxy Quest took the piss out of it a little bit. And so it was never looked at as the cool franchise. It was always looked at the one with the fans who corrected everyone about the photon speeds in that. So I think it kind of
Oh yeah, the Simpsons did it quite a discredit over the years with comic book guy arguing on the early internet about various Star Trek things and Futurama as well.
yeah.
Reference it. It's a huge phenomenon. Obviously, Star Trek. It's been referenced and parodied so many times. But where it's the analogy that I think best describes it is in Star Trek, the crew and the ship are symbiotic and they work together to solve the problem. Whereas in something like Star Wars, it's almost like the heroes win despite the ship trying to break in front of them, or
Oh wow.
it's all about the glory of the heroes versus the collective teamwork of everyone pulling together and solving the problem.
Because they're all on the ship. Like, oh, we need to do this. We need to get the transporter working. It's not working. I'm giving her all she's got, Captain. You know, the doctor's running in. You have, like, we got to hit light speed. Like, I guess everyone's working together to solve problems in sometimes non-violent ways. And that should be considered really neat. That should be considered kind of awesome, as opposed to this. Here's a giant thing. It blew up a planet. We're gonna blow it up. So it's, yeah. I guess I can see how it isn't that big. And you know what's interesting too is this first movie. V'ger is just a probe that's coming back to Earth, and it wants to touch its master because it learned a lot. So there's really
Yeah,
no.
it's
There's
well
no. Oh,
they've
sorry. Go
just
for it.
patched it. Well, they just patched it last week. NASA sent a software patch out to V'ger. It's still going strong out in the edge of the solar system.
Is that, wait? Really?
Yeah,
Oh, that's amazing. So yeah, it's just.
there was a broken chip or something, and the software engineers were able to send an update to tell it to use a different chip to run its software. And so now it's still sending back data, which is kind of crazy.
Oh, that's awesome. And yeah, I think it's coming home. It's sending us information. It's doing what it should. And they solve the problem, but there's no mustache twirling villain. There's no Borg. There's no anything. And then the two people get sucked up together, but you don't really miss them. And then they're going to be happy because that one lady's already dead. Like, she already became an android. So it's the guy's like, I'm not a captain anymore. I guess I'm out. I might as well go into this computer system. and then the movie ends and everyone's happy again. So it's just a really chill movie with a few somewhat exciting parts and a lot of dragged out moments. But it still has its charm and it looks good. And I don't know. I find a certain, I don't know. I think it's charming. I do. I wouldn't
What I
say,
think it did is it proved that Star Trek could work on the big screen,
yeah.
which paved the way for the later movies, some of which were excellent.
I feel bad though is that so this movie Star Trek the Motion Picture it made 139 million worldwide, and then when the Wrath of Khan came out, it made 95. So I think people weren't too hot, and then Star Trek 3, which is really good, made 87. So well then the Voyage Home made 133, but that one's really good. They're all really good, but that one had some really sellable moments. But I just it's interesting that it kicked off with a giant box office and then it kind of fell off for a while and it never really was able to recapture the box office gross of that first one. So it's kind of a shame that they released this movie so quick because it just didn't everyone went to see it. It made a lot of money, but it did not it did not really warm people up to a sequel. I don't think it warmed many casual people who had never watched Star Trek. They're like, "Oh, yeah, I'm excited for the next one" because they remembered the motion picture. So
So it did pretty well.
yeah,
So where it launched against Superman.
Phew.
So December 7th, 1979, Superman released a week later, December 15th.
Yeah, you're not like just that movie felt alive. Remember when you watch that now, you feel alive with it, and it's like a charming movie with a good villain and just a good story. And then there's this one that do you think a lot of people just went to it because people were Star Trek fans from the original run, Star Trek fans from syndication, and then people who are just curious about watching the guy who directed the Sound of Music's new space film? So uh, it's got to be all three because it made so much money. But I guess I
I
think it
think when
helped
we
the
when we get
franchise, but it
into the
also
later
hurt.
films, I've just had a sneak peek at what The Wrath of Khan was up against in the box office when it came out, and I can understand why it didn't do so well. There were some
Uh,
absolute massive heavy hitters there.
and 82 and June 4, middle of the summer. We'll talk about that for that episode.
We'll
But
talk about that later. But yeah, so
I still enjoy this movie though. I don't want to hate it. I don't want to. I'm not. I don't want to act like I'm hating on it. I just understand where it came from, and I know that's being boring, but I like knowing why it is, where it is, when it was, how it was, and now when I watch it, I just have an understanding of it. So I don't know if I would pop this back on casually to watch it, but if I ever wanted a very unstressful, chill vibe, I would probably put this on and not something like First Contact.
yeah, if I wanted to watch a very chilled out Star Trek, I would go this. Maybe Generations is generally pretty chill. I think of
Yeah, yeah.
the other ones, but this is definitely degrees of chill higher than Generations. It's almost 99% chill with a tiny little bit of edge.
Yeah, there's some people say like movies are zero chill. This one's 99% chill, 1% no chill. But I'm happy though. I'm happy we kicked off on this because I don't know people who say skip this one. I think you're doing a disservice because it's all part of Star Trek lore, and I think it did some important things by creating the score for Next Generation. It taught them what to do and what not to do. And most like in exactly what you said, it proved that the franchise was commercially viable. So you gotta watch it. You can't skip it. So Niall, skip or not skip if you're gonna start the franchise.
I would watch it. I think not skip. I think there's enough worthwhile stuff in there. What we need now is someone to do like Topher Grace did for the prequels and just do
The
a really
Topher Grace cut.
condensed cut of Star Trek the Motion Picture and really tighten it up. And I think that would be super watchable.
Oh, I love that. Let's do that. Good call. Hey, so real quick before we get out of here, I want to do a 1979. Well, I don't know if there's enough in here. Let's do a 1979 draft of 1979 movies. What do you think?
Okay.
Every
Yeah,
year we'll do
sure.
one. So 1979 movies. I know what you're going to pick first, but I'll give you first pick if you want it.
All right. I am going to go for something a little bit out of left field, actually.
Ooh.
Um, I am going to go for Life of Brian,
The best rock throwing
Monty
scene
Python.
ever. I love that rock throwing scene.
Yeah, there are a lot of very obvious ones here, but I think I'll go for that.
Well, I'm going to take it. I'm going to take Alien. I don't care. I'm doing Alien.
You're doing Alien. I'm gonna take Superman.
Oh, oh gosh. That's a good one. I'll take The Jerk. We're shooting at
That's
all the
I like
can.
the jerk.
Yeah.
I'm
She
going to
told me she would
take
get me a job,
Moonraker.
a blow job. Remember that movie? So
I'm going to
stupid.
go for Moonraker.
Oh, good one.
Some
Okay.
Roger Moore silliness.
Oh man, there's some good movies here. I am going to take you. This is bad, but I've watched this documentary so many times of Hearts of Darkness. I'm going to take Apocalypse Now.
Oof, that's strong, strong.
Have I ever gone this strong on one of our matchups before?
Ooh,
Normally I go
I
pretty
don't know.
crazy.
I'm going to take. Ooh, it's a
Oh
tough
no.
one. I might go for Rocky.
Oh, Rocky
Rocky
2.
2.
Oh, I like that. It's good. I'm gonna take the Warriors.
Oh, nice. I was considering that. That was where my needle was hovering, either the Warriors or Rocky, and I decided to go for Rocky.
All right, what's your last pick here?
Last pick.
There's some fun
Ooh, I
movies
don't
in
know.
'79.
Um, I
Oh man.
haven't actually seen it, but I'm going to pick it up anyway. Because I love the remake, Le Cage à Folle, which
Oh,
is
that's
the
fun.
was remade into the Birdcage, but
Oh,
it's
that's
I guess
that,
the French original
good job.
version.
The Birdcage is fun, man. I remember watching that back in the day. It's,
I love the Birdcage. It's great.
oh man. Okay, so I have the last pick. I feel like I really went hard, so I need to find something really random here before we get out of here. Let's see. Hey, so while you're looking, where can people find you? Where can people find Niall? Where can
I'm on Twitter, Instagram, all the socials as El Nilo, and I tend to tweet random nonsense, mostly about rugby, but
and your travels?
some and my travels.
I'm gonna take Being There. It's probably one of
Okay,
my all-time favorite films. Yeah, it's in
yeah,
my
that's
top
pretty
three.
cool.
I like that. This is a good pick. There's some bangers on this one.
Yeah, it was a good year.
Very good year. All right, man. Well, thank you for joining me. I'm ready for Wrath of Khan, and yeah, just thank you for opening up my world to Star Trek.
Yeah, for sure. It's been
Awesome, man.
fun.
All right, so for me, Mark Hoffmeyer, for Now More, this is Movies, Films, and Flicks. We'll see you next week.